Hello, I'm Brian Points. My company produced the economic impact of the El Paso Climate Charter. We put this video together as an additional option for citizens to learn about our report and to respond to several recent criticisms. If you want to read our report, you can find it on the El Paso Chamber website. First, let's start with what the report says and how we arrived at those conclusions. In short, we read every letter of the Climate Charter and played out the economic consequences if the Charter's goals are fully accomplished. There is no secret political agenda or desire to confuse voters. The methodology is that simple. For those who haven't read the report, we lay out the sources of negative impacts, which include minor issues like increased costs to support city government. The biggest impact by far is under the heading of all other industries. In this category, we project the loss of 195,000 of the total 198,000 jobs lost. The underlying assumptions here are not complicated. Your economy needs energy like your body needs food. Without it, you simply cannot continue to function. On this point, a few more statistics might be helpful. Did you know that 95% of energy used by El Pasoans today comes from non-renewable sources? The Charter calls for 100% clean renewable energy by 2045. So the question is, how will El Paso make up their current usage and anticipated growth of demand, which will amount to 15.4 million megawatt hours by 2045? The answer is, it is virtually impossible to accomplish without crippling the economy in the process. To reach that goal, El Paso would need to increase its contribution of renewable energy 13-fold over its current baseline and maintain that pace for the next 22 years. El Paso has not been slacking in this regard either. In fact, El Paso ranked 4th among all cities in Texas over the past 2 years in solarization. Even including these highly aggressive assumptions, we project the community falling short of energy supply by 72% by 2045, hence the drastic negative economic impact figures. Now, claims like this have run into criticism from some. Among other things, our report has been called fear-mongering, a hatchet job, and chock full of lies. What I have not seen in these articles is a reasoned explanation about what precisely is faulty about our assumptions. Of course, it is a lot easier to criticize somebody else's work than it is to do your own. Responses from advocates of the Climate Charter have often downplayed negative economic consequences on the grounds that our assumptions are too extreme. This is an interesting critique, considering that we pulled the language directly from the Climate Charter itself, which says, "The City of El Paso shall employ all available methods to require that energy used within the city is generated by clean renewable energy with the goals of requiring 80% of clean renewable energy by 2030 and 100% clean renewable energy by 2045. There are some interesting contradictions in the wording here. Note that the Charter, on the one hand, suggests that the policies are just aspirational. Shall employ all available methods. Yet at other points it is very assertive. Require is used in multiple places. At this point, you should be asking yourself, well, which one is it? Something that they will try or something that we will be forced to comply with? There are really only two options here. Either this section was very poorly written, or it was intentionally loaded with as much ambiguity that it can be made to mean whatever they want it to mean and at whatever cost. Conveniently, this level of vagueness also affords advocates the ability to deny all claims about what their policy actually means. We have a few examples. Let me quote some. Electrical lines will still carry energy generated by fossil fuel-powered plants. Interesting statement, considering that Section 9.2.e of the Climate Charter categorically excludes natural gas as a source of clean renewable energy. Point 2. Green jobs will explode in El Paso. There will be green jobs, and we did account for that. But did you know that 2/3 of solar jobs exist only during the construction and installation phase? Another 13% is in manufacturing, which probably wouldn't even occur in El Paso. In other words, 8 out of 10 of these green jobs would either be short-term or would not be created in El Paso at all. Third point, quote, the policy would only ban the sale of city water to fossil fuel operators located outside of El Paso, which would not include the refinery. Really? Per section 9.12-1, the city, quote, shall not transfer or sell any water for purposes of fossil fuel industry activities outside of the city limits. And where exactly does the crude oil come from that is processed at the El Paso refinery? Certainly not from within El Paso. If not allowed to transport crude oil from outside of city limits, the refinery would not exist. Are we to believe that policymakers have no interest in exploiting this angle? Especially when proponents have argued, quote, we do plan to phase it out, exclamation point. Overall, whenever charter advocates are pushed, they fall back on the claim the Climate Charter isn't a rigid set of policies. That's why we wrote goals in this document, they say. This seems to me the most duplicitous of all explanations. Imagine that I were to tell you that my goal is to run a 5-minute mile by the end of this year. That's not an easy thing to accomplish. Naturally, you may inquire about whether my diet and workout plan are adequate. If I responded, well, it's just a goal, you may question whether I really meant it. I submit to you that the Ground Game Texas folks really do mean it. They just either don't know or don't want to fess up publicly to what it's going to take to get there. We could go on, but I think it's sufficient to prove my point. All things considered, it is unfathomable to me how the points consulting analysis can be labeled, quote, an attempt to confuse the El Paso electorate, end quote, while the utterly equivocating and schizophrenic climate charter itself gets a lifetime hall pass from state and local media. My perception from reading these articles is that the hard questions have all been pointed in one direction, namely towards the chamber. Meanwhile, Ground Game Texas seems to have slid by on the primary campaign plank of trust us, we're experts. And need I remind you, the chamber is the one that actually put the effort into quantifying these claims, whereas Ground Game Texas wants you to pass the bill, then maybe at some point in the distant future they can tell you about the costs. Finally, I want to end with an appeal. I am not a resident of El Paso. In fact, I don't even live in Texas. I did this because I want you, citizens of El Paso, to think carefully about the people you choose to lead you and the policies you choose to enact. Do you want vague feel-good policies? Do you want policies that mean one thing now, something else 12 months from now, and a total restructuring of your life 5 years from now? If so, go right ahead. The proponents of this bill have already told you that even they don't know what the law proposes. They'll figure it out as they go. After all, they are just goals.